there can be a lot of excitement, and I think that's great. I'm trying to hold conversations of substance to try to help folks along their journey.
Welcome to the Entrepreneurs Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Harless. This is a podcast where we explore stories of resilience, stories of entrepreneurship, and also stories of the healing potential of psychedelics. If this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. I'm really excited to have you here today. If this is your 92nd time or whatever number we're on today, I'm glad that you're here. And I'm excited because the work that I've been doing in some of these solo cast series, some of you have appreciated that. That's more of like a personal journey that I'm getting to explore as I'm learning more parts of myself and jumping on the microphone and sharing these aspects of myself that I'm integrating. I'm always integrating these life experiences. Some of them are medicine experiences, some of them are not. It's just life experiences, and with healing grief and all these different things that I've been navigating over the last year. So thank you all for your feedback about those solo casts. And today I'm really excited because today's episode is with Jimmy Nguyen, who is the founder of Psychedelic Passage. And this is a wonderful discussion where Jimmy went on very educated, long responses that I really appreciated about entrepreneurship and psychedelics and ethics and care and how to vet facilitators in the space and the concept of the psychedelic concierge, which is, that's something that I'm super curious in, obviously. So this is just a fascinating conversation with Jimmy. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hey, Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. It's really great to finally get to know you a lot better, a lot deeper. We've really briefly met. We met one time before, but the name and your company I've heard of for quite some time in the psychedelic space. And so I'm just really glad you're here. And we're going to have, I think a lot of great discussions during this. I have a lot of curiosities to pick your brain. So just happy you're here, my friend.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I always try to bring some level of value to these psychedelic related, conversations. And I find that there can be a lot of excitement, a lot of what I call like psychedelic cheerleaderism. And I think that's great. And I'm also trying to hold like conversations of substance as well to try to help folks along their journey. So looking forward to diving in with you, and thank you for the invite, and hello to the audience and the listeners and viewers. And yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost feel like we should have live streamed this for some reason, but maybe in the future.
Maybe one day we'll do it. Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to just start with getting to know you a little bit better, your story. I want to hear a little bit, if you don't mind sharing, some of your backstory and, at whatever level you want to come in at, but maybe how did you become the Jimmy that we know today? I mean, you run this company, Psychedelic Passage, but how did you even come to that person, to grow into that person, to start that company?
Yeah, there's a lens where I will answer in the frame of being the founder of Psychedelic Passage. And also in the arc of my own personal life, I've been having this really interesting reflective period where more presently I've been looking back over the past 10 years, 20 years, just different eras of my life and all of the different decisions and choices, conversations, life events that have led to who I am now. And it'll be interesting to look 20, 30 years from now, hopefully, if I have that time to kind of do the same process of where I am now and where future me sits. And in that discovery, or just in that own internal process, it's easy to think, okay, there's the me that has almost like evolved every day to now. But when I look at it like a milestone or a timestamp, I'm like, whoa, I am radically different than how I was even in my teens and, things like that. And so, even before talking about Psychedelic Passage, I'll describe that I have been a person who's had the luck and the privilege to engage with psychedelic substances and plant and fungi medicines. I think the first time I smoked cannabis was I was like 14. It was like my eighth grade graduation party. And those experiences aren't a replacement for the makeup of who I am, but they have massively impacted who I am, my values, my worldview, and what matters to me. Also, as a part of that, how I serve. And so I was the type of individual who bought in to a lot of the social promises of our society. I live in America, the United States of America. And I think that there's this understanding of the American dream that if you do certain things, take certain actions, have certain beliefs, have certain participation in community and society, that you are then given some um, safeguards of society, which most people want fulfillment. They want financial security. They want the ability to maybe buy a house one day and, find happiness as well. And so I ascribed to that for a very long time. And as my life went on, I realized, okay, there's some gaps here. It doesn't seem like what I'm doing is actually leading me to more fulfillment, more purpose, and more passion. So prior to my intersection of uh, plant medicines and fungi medicines being a part of my career, um, I did the traditional stuff, went to college, went to graduate school, got my MBA, focused on real estate, banking, finance for the first part of my career. And I found myself in a pretty unhealthy place, pretty disillusioned with some of these, social constructs, and was on a pretty unhealthy path as a human in general. And so through some circumstances, I ended up doing a major shift. And in 2014, that was the same year that cannabis was legalized recreationally in Colorado. I entered into a career in the legal cannabis industry, which spanned about a decade. And then, fast forward to the excitement and the mainstreaming of psychedelics, I then took a lot of my lessons and tools and knowledge about what happened in cannabis and was like, okay, can I apply this to the psychedelic space? Can I see a way for us to avoid those same pitfalls, those same issues in psychedelics? And, my own relationship with psychedelics probably spans back almost 20 years as well. And so there was this great merging of all of these different aspects and areas of my life, together. Psychedelic Passage was founded in 2019, late 2019. And this was an era where Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, came out just a year before. There was a lot of interest in a lot of the clinical trials and studies that were going on, particularly with MDMA. Psilocybin was recently designated as a potential breakthrough therapy. And so it just raised a lot of questions for me. I'm like, how does a person who is not plugged into existing spiritual community, existing psychedelic community, how will they go about figuring out all of this? And that was the inspiration and motivation that started Psychedelic Passage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that backstory. And I'm certainly curious about 10 years in the cannabis industry and you being a business person, entrepreneur,
yeah,
and how that sort of shaped your viewpoint too, maybe even of psychedelic facilitators and training. I'm not, I just come to, I wanted to learn about entrepreneurs myself. I started Entrepreneurs in Recovery. There was no entrepreneurs in my family, but I was working in the cellular industry since I was 17. I worked for Verizon for 14 years, and I was like, okay, I got some seeds planted by entrepreneurs. And I share all that to say, I'm curious how you as an entrepreneur, how that shapes your view of facilitators and in the psychedelic space. And I'm just curious how do you think that ties in together? Because I think it's relevant when you think of entrepreneurship and the freedom that can come with that, even the mental freedom. And there's a lot of, just you sort of can make your own way. It's not easy, but you can do it. So how does that translate into psychedelic facilitation and facilitators that you train?
Yeah, that's a good question. And just to clarify, we don't do a lot of like training and apprenticeship of facilitators. We more sit as a connector,
Right.
connecting different people and populations to other segments of psychedelic work. And so our primary thing right now is connecting psychedelic curious people to the right educational resources and knowledge base, as well as service providers who end up being therapists, facilitators, guides. And I love your question because I've been, examining and unpacking a part of my identity, which is an entrepreneur. And there's a paradox that always sits in entrepreneurship, which you nailed it. I was seeking freedom. I was seeking freedom, and I was seeking an alternate way to find fulfillment and purpose. And I was also seeking to reclaim like control over my life, the things that I choose to do, and all of that. However, anybody who is a true entrepreneur knows that it's quite a slog. It can be quite an uphill climb. And I think this might have been Gary Vee in one of his earlier things, but I think that he defined entrepreneurship as just being continually just punched in the face constantly with a smile on it and like asking for more. And so on one side, people are seeking like liberation, freedom, time in their schedule, all this stuff. And on the other side, it requires a massive amount of time and effort and commitment. And it just like comes with stuff, complexity, uh, challenges, overcoming obstacles, hurdles. Like, there's a lot of stuff coming at you in entrepreneurship. And so, you're asking this question a little bit as it relates to psychedelic facilitation. And I'm also just realizing that alongside entrepreneurship, there's a certain set of ingrained values and purposes, let's say. And one of the things that I was challenging as I stepped into, entrepreneurship, I'll share this personally. When I left my real estate finance job, I made a promise to myself that I'm no longer going to work at a place that I absolutely hate. And then that's what started my jump into cannabis, which I started as like a bud tender at a dispensary.
Mm-hmm.
And then fast forward 6 years, I was like, okay, I'm now that goal has evolved. I'm now no longer going to work at a place that I hate. My goal is to never work for somebody ever again. And then what does that mean? It comes with a whole set of things. And so what I realized is that as I was pursuing that, I'm like, okay, well, what type of boss do I want to be to myself as
Mm-hmm.
well? And there can be the certain element of like grind culture. And just in entrepreneurship itself, it's laid upon this, construct that is generally seen in more of the fundraising investing world, which is to scale and exit. And so I'm like, is that even what I want? What if I wanted to create an organization that lasted 7 generations, for example? And what would that actually look like? Can I create a working and culture environment that honors neurodivergence, for example? And how does that apply and like relate? And so in my pursuit of entrepreneurship, there's this parallel of the same pursuits that I was looking for in my own psychedelic work, which is like, who am I? What do I care about? How do I want to spend my time? Can I find my fulfillment and purpose? And a lot of that is embedded into the culture that we have at Psychedelic Passage. And so I think it's interesting because when somebody engages in psychedelics, they're also kind of going through this process of questioning their social conditioning and some of the constructs and things of how they live their life. And so I was like, there's this fascinating, parallel.
Mm-hmm.
The main thing that I was, setting out to avoid that I learned in my time in cannabis was a couple of things. One is that cannabis was on its way to hyper capitalism and commodification like very quickly. And I think the other part of that was that in order to do so, let's say to have the widespread adoption of legal cannabis that we as a society experience over the past like 10 years or so, but it goes back way, way further. Um, it really was able to happen because of the either miseducation or uneducation of the user base. And so what ended up happening there was that people got to define the story of what cannabis is, how it should be used, and who's allowed to use it. And I think the same thing happens with psychedelics. Who's allowed to engage with it, in what context and why, and who's allowed to serve in this environment, right? So there could be a world where psychedelics are only allowed for people with specific diagnoses in the DSM-5 and can only be used that way. And anybody who has engaged with psychedelics also knows that that's like not the only way, right? And so I think that there's another also interesting societal paradigm that happens where when folks get into anything related to healing, therapeutic services, support services, or what some people kind of regard as like the healing arts, which can involve a range of different things, body work, energy work, psychosomatic work, traditional psychotherapy. There's this notion that because those things are so embedded in the human aspect that they should also be offered for free. And so another thing that happens is that there is this devaluing of more, let's call it like softer skills that
Yeah.
are required in psychedelic care.
Yeah.
And then there's also folks who are practitioners or facilitators in the space who are combating their own like broke healer archetype, right?
Yeah.
And so what that does is that puts oftentimes business and entrepreneurship on the opposite end of the spectrum from service and creating pathways, towards healing as well.
Yeah.
So I'm like, do they actually have to be on opposite ends of the spectrum? That's
Yeah.
been my whole goal here that I've been
Yeah.
trying to figure out.
Yeah, that's a great discussion. When I get into psychedelics 5 years ago, and I work with some guides that were, underground, and they were people. There was above ground and below ground, of course, but there was people, and that was there. They would talk to me because I had started this brand, Entrepreneurs in Recovery. So they'd be like, "Do you think I'm charging enough? Should I do something different?" They had all these questions, and there was a hint of shame when they said, "I want to go higher in my price, but I don't want to do it either because I feel more people should be able to access these, and I just don't know." And I'm like, nah, I can hear that. That makes a lot of sense that you feel that way. And that discussion early on showed me there's a lot of people in the space of healing and, in general, but in the psychedelic space that struggle with that. How do I make a living in doing this? Because I want people to have not just psychologically healing experiences. Some of these can take you to come into understanding of God, creator, nature, ineffable, whatever you want to call it. So it's the spiritual mystical as well, which is, extremely profound. It was for me. But it's like, how do you charge for that? And then, but when you see this legality of psychedelics happening, it's like, well, we'll charge 11,000 for MDMA when that's legal. And it's like, whoa, okay. And you have underground facilitators or some above ground that are struggling to charge a tenth of that, And so Yeah. What is your take on that? Because I know that's a really big one.
Well, there's no standards out there. And so that can be this like allure of colonizing plant medicine space. Because if you feel like there is a blank slate, if you feel like there's land that's unclaimed, then you get to go in and set the rules. And so there can be this colonizing aspect of psychedelic work, which I'm always careful, to track. I'm also a realist in knowing that if there is a way for psychedelics to emerge into our society in a meaningful way, it does need to build upon the existing structures of our society. We are a society that does value business. We are a society that does value currency and capitalism to a degree, and commodification, to a degree. And so it's this really interesting dynamic that if you look at any other industry out there, there's precedent, there's case study. You can look at the way that things have been done that's led up to now. And legal psychedelics or emergent psychedelic services don't have that. And so a lot of people don't even have the backboard upon which to understand, what is socially, ethically acceptable, what is acceptable as an entrepreneur as well. So I've seen a lot of theories, and I'm also very careful to not sit here and act like my thoughts are somehow superior than others. What I'll say is that all of the approaches to psychedelic work, we're talking about entrepreneurship and business, but I believe that all of the themes that present itself in psychedelic work are mirrors of themes that happen in our society. So, for example, there are facilitators who believe that they can make the most impact by working with the most influential people. Mm-hmm. And they say that if I can reach out and work with this high earning individual or this high impact individual and charge them $10,000 or $15,000, or if I can work with an entrepreneur group, or if I can work with a large corporation one day and provide psychedelic services as part of their employee benefits program, then maybe I can make the most impact. And there is a unconscious belief in there that those folks then believe in the trickle down economic effect of that. Mm-hmm. And then you can argue whether trickle down economics actually works or not. We're seeing the same thing here with the distribution of wealth, for example. And some people believe that if you take care of the top 1% or the billionaires and above, that there's going to be this trickle down effect to the rest of society. Largely doesn't seem like it works, meaning that there are segments of the population who will never receive that trickle down effect, no matter how well your systems are, right? Now, if you go to the other side where you're like, okay, well, how do I create services that are accessible to folks, but then also knowing that these folks likely don't have the financial privilege. They may not even be experiencing the right privilege in general, like housing privilege, food stability, and a number of different things. And likely those folks are the ones who would probably benefit from psychedelics the most, right? And so there's this constant balancing act, I believe. And I can sit here and discuss like what feels right and wrong and what makes the most impact, but a lot of this have to be it has to be determined from the individual internally first, to say that this is the space that I want to be in and here's the impact that I want to make. Now, yes, we live in a world where fiat currency exists, financial systems, exist. And so this then mirrors some of the things around like economic exchange. Like I have worked with high earners and they have paid significant amounts to work with me for sure. And that's not always equal to the level of their energetic investment. Mm-hmm. And I've also worked with folks where, let's just call it like $1,500. $1,500 is a lot of money for most Americans out there. And there are also people who have that threshold and they are putting in even more work because they understand the impact of what $1,500, can do. So there's this kind of parallel around like energetic exchange and commitment, what that looks, financially. And then, there is a world, I believe, where people should be sustainably paid for the value that they create. But again, that's not a problem that's specific to the psychedelic space. That is a problem that is specific to our society and culture. So it runs pretty deep. Like, I don't have advice for people who are targeting, let's say, like high programs, high earners, or folks who are on the other end of the spectrum, which is like, how can I offer these services in as accessible of a way as possible?
Yeah, it's a great discussion. I mean, you think about if, like, for instance, I trained a drug court in Atlanta, one of the biggest drug courts in the country, and the drug court population is arguably one of the most hardest hit populations in the United States, with drug addiction and comorbidities and mental health issues, housing, all the things you said. But I also go, what would happen if they could have access to psychedelic care, and they could have access to trained facilitators and guides and this type of care? And what would happen to society at large if we had populations that have this access, and once they had a chance to be able to go and work on these things that they may or may not want to work on, but if they choose to, like you said, instead of like a trickle down effect, now you have people at the place where they're really struggling. Now they have this experience. Whoa, I can see there's more to life. There's more to my PTSD, the trauma, the all of the stuff that they have experienced in a lifespan. Obviously, racism, prejudice, all these things, and lack of privilege, all these things. But what if they could have access? And I come to think of that too. Like, what would happen if the drug court friends, which I should have been in a drug court when I got arrested, but there wasn't available at the time. So it's really personal to me when I can work with drug courts and see these individuals. And if they give and many of them, if they just have a chance, it's like they could become the next whatever. Maybe they can impact the psychedelic industry as we know it. One of them, you know what I'm saying? So I just
yeah
that too. It's a big conversation, and I'm glad we're having it.
There's this really interesting like parallel thread that's happening, and one of the themes of what you were just saying is this discourse around, well, what levels does healing need to take place? I'm just using this as an example, and I'll tie it into entrepreneurship and business as well. Does it happen at the individual level, or does it happen at the collective level? And likely it's some combination of both. You work with a person who had a profound psychedelic experience, but if they go back into their environments of trauma, if they go back into houselessness, if they go back into food insecurity, then what are you actually really doing to support them? It's like you can take a fish and rehab the fish if it's sick, but if you put it back into the same toxic waters, then the same thing will happen. Like, one of the biggest criticisms I've had of, Rick Doblin and MAPS, I think they do amazing work. I don't think that they should be conflated for the entire psychedelic movement, which they often are. But when Rick Doblin talks about net zero trauma by 2070, I'm like, which dial are you turning? Are you turning the dial of less trauma overall? Or are you turning the dial of people being more resistant and resilient to trauma, meaning that they can endure more trauma, but they're better able to handle it? So where is that net zero that you're discussing? And so when we look at this, I think that, to tie it back to entrepreneurship, is that there's the same parallel that exists. And folks in psychedelic entrepreneurship are it's thrust upon them the same ethical concern. And I think the same thing's happening with AI, by the way. People who are promoting and advancing AI because there's like what can be beneficial to the individual and the direction on where kind of the collective is going. And so there's the zoomed in problems. How can I get a consistent client base? How can I share my gifts and my talents? How can I do this sustainably? How can I work with the right clients? How can I market myself and all the right, like these are just embedded into trying to provide any product or service ever, right? And then if you have a zoom out approach, it's like, is what I'm doing going to progress the psychedelic space in the direction that I believe it should go? And I think most people who are in the psychedelic entrepreneurship world likely are focusing on the first part of what I'm sharing and maybe not so much on the second part. I think that there are people who do want to progress the movement for sure. But I think that if people had to choose, they would choose the individual affect over like, what does this look like 60 years from now when I'm dead, for example.
Yeah, for sure.
So it creates a funny kind of, conundrum for a lot of folks.
What you said must have been important because I just experienced a small earthquake as you were saying that here in Costa Rica. And It's only been it only happened 3 times since I've been here in the last 14 months, and it just happened.
Well, I'm not going to have the hubris to think that it came from my words, but
I know.
I sit here in the synchronicity with you that
there's like
a small tremor.
Well, these like small tremors come, and I know those one. This one literally just, you didn't see it. It rocked my light, the camera.
Wow.
It rocked this futon. That's how I know it was a earthquake, because we had a 6.1 here about a month ago. 6.1 earthquake here, and I've never experienced that in my life till I came here. And that one actually opened the cabinets. And but anyways,
Yeah.
Whatever you're saying,
you gotta be careful.
Wow, whatever you're saying. So
I'll keep spitting. I'll keep going.
Keep spitting this fire here. So I know it's something we could probably talk hours on. Now I realize I'm like, wow, we'll have to do another episode because
for sure.
There's so much. But I really want to get into, and I think a lot of people listening want to also hear about, because I call myself a psychedelic concierge, and it took me many years before I wanted to call myself that. And you guys do that as a business, as Psychedelic Passage. You do that as business. You do a lot more than that. But one of the things I want to hear about from you is, how do you, with the facilitators, maybe you can talk a little bit about what is the psychedelic concierge? What does that mean? But also, how do you vet facilitators that are working at Psychedelic Passage?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of different versions of concierge services in general. And I think the most common vision in people's mind is, if you go to a nice enough hotel, sometimes they have a concierge. You're looking for a place to eat, you're looking for entertainment or something, and they may be able to make recommendations. This also spans into a very high touch, high service level world, such as medical concierge. You have a specific need for a specialist or a specific procedure or something, you're going to go to somebody who has the right level of expertise and knowledge to be able to pair you to the right thing. And the reason why those stakes are higher is because it involves your physical well-being. Psychedelics are no different, because when you are searching for care providers, you are not only having to address your physical well-being, but your mental well-being, your spiritual, well-being as well. And so I realized very early on that one of the beautiful things about psychedelics is that they are inherently like personal in nature. There's always a personal element of psychedelic exploration. So for me, I was like, okay, well, how do I infuse that into our concierge, model? And so the 3 core values of our organization are sacredness, empowerment, and connection. Sacredness meaning does what you're doing, does it matter? Does it have a level of reverence to it? The empowerment, we do a lot through knowledge and education. So that's really the side that's aimed towards the psychedelic curious folks, which is like, before you even get connected to a service provider, you would probably benefit from having a base level of acumen or knowledge, because most people not only don't know the criteria of what they're looking for, they also don't know the questions to ask as a part of it. And then the third kind of triple factor is that they don't even know how to verify if the response or the information they're receiving back is valid or not. And so we've had to do a lot of teaching to folks around, some of these things, because it's more than just who can provide the service to me and who can source me medicine as well. Those are usually the general, criteria. And so as we went out to create this multi-sided platform, because we really run two businesses, we run one that's aimed at our, psychedelic curious folks, and then another that's aimed towards the infrastructure of our facilitator network. I also knew at the time that there was a significant level of investment and thought that would need to be put into training programs, apprenticeship programs, and mentorship programs. So I made a very clear decision early on that we weren't going to be that to start. Maybe we'll have a model of that like down the road. And in order to bet on that, I needed to assume that there were high quality, highly ethical, and highly skilled people who are already doing this work. They just need an outlet to be able to do it. And so the premise for me with the facilitator network is this: the sacred space holding that's required in any type of intentional or therapeutic psychedelic work, that actually represents the prerequisite. That's actually the base of the pyramid. And then you got to add on top of that good ethics, good customer service, good communication skills, good emergency protocols, good systems thinking, right? And so what that then got me realizing was that there's actually a number of prerequisites out there. And so what we do in our network is it's an invitation only. You need to be invited to apply to our network, whether that's establishing a relationship through email or connection, or somebody in our network. And then in order to be invited to apply, there's a number of prerequisites, like you have to have at least been in the space. And this is the floor. Really represents the floor. You have to have been in the professional services space with psychedelics for at least 2 years. You have to have worked with at least 40 clients. You have to get client references and professional non-client references. And then we go through this really, honestly, tedious application process to kind of weed people out effectively. And we're asking questions around all of their processes, their emergency protocols, past challenging experiences, how they've navigated, certain situations, what their intake process looks like, what their prep process looks like, what their dosing day or ceremony day looks like, all of that. And that's even just to get to the interview process. So we have a multi-step way, because you can have all of those things on paper, and you might not have the demeanor or personality to work with folks in a very sensitive way. And so then we engage then in a more like human oriented, interview process, which usually spans about a month on average. But there have been times I've chatted with folks for, 6 months ongoingly to see if they're, a fit in our network. And my approach to that starts with the human. Like, who is this human on the other side of the screen? And can I really get to know them and what they care about and their values and their goals? Okay, once I get an understanding of that, let's then drill in philosophically around how they approach psychedelic work. Okay, great. Now I have that understanding. Now let's drill into protocol and procedures and process. And so through that, we end up building pretty strong relationships to where I then have a level of confidence that this person that I'm recommending through Psychedelic Passage would be a person that I would recommend my mom to. And it's not perfect, because the criteria that I have and the criteria that my mom would have, even though she'll probably never do psychedelics, is not the same as a psychedelic curious person who just happened to find our site. And so a lot of this is fit. Like, can I establish the minimum requirements to know that folks are pre-vetted, they've gone through a background check, they've gone through all of this stuff. And then within that, then can people have a lot of choice? So then when people go through our concierge service, some of the things I tell them is like, if you assume that all of our psychedelic passage facilitators are high quality, highly ethical people, then it's kind of like ice cream. If it's all ice cream, you're then picking your flavor of ice cream. And some people absolutely hate some flavors, and some people, love others.
Mm. Yeah, that was a really great description of what you do and psychedelic concierge and what you're doing. I know a person who is in your network that and that tells me a lot about, and this is before I ever knew you or any of that, but it told me a lot about what you do because this person is the real deal. And I know this because I worked with this person and known them for years. Because before I decided to do psychedelics, I was abstinence, sobriety, black and white, which really served me for a period of time. But when I decided I was going to get into psychedelics, I was like, I'm about to have an ego death. I'm about to have like maybe a financial death, like all these things, because I'm going to break my identity. And I hired a person who's in your network who was able to work with me before I ever touched the psychedelic. And I needed that. I needed like this, I come from I'm a therapist by training, and I coach people, consult, all these different things. And I do like to co-regulate with people I trust and feel safe with. And this person was that until I decided to embark on my first psychedelic journeys. And she was there, and just, wow. So I have a lot of respect for what you do. And, I don't know everyone in the network, but just knowing the person I do speaks a lot, speaks volume to what you guys are doing and the standards of care and ethics. And
I'd like to add that, by the way, I have a lot of love for this individual that we're talking about. I hope that she'll listen to this at some point, and it's been great having them in our network for sure. And what I want to speak to is that just the same way that entrepreneurship can have this notion that none of it is static, like it's always evolving and changing. And so I can do my best to set up the structure and the system, and there will still be mistakes and errors and missteps. And so one of the unique things I think that we offer through Psychedelic Passage is this intermediary advocacy, which you really don't see in a lot of like directories or connector services or concierge services. And what this speaks to for me is that I am making an energetic commitment. If I'm going to be introducing you to somebody in my network, that means that I do bear a level of ownership on that. Maybe it's not responsibility, because what happens between the client and the facilitator and the medicine is what happens in that container. However, what does happen if there's suspected facilitator abuse? What does happen if there's a communication misstep? What does happen if there's client abuse or client issue? And so one of the things that I'm very proud of within our organization is that we have created enough of a level of trust and transparency where people will reach out about these things and they'll share them with us. And then it creates this really unique opportunity for us to advocate for both sides. How do I advocate for the journeyer? And how do I also advocate for the service provider? And 98% of those situations end up in repair. And then there's a larger percent of that as well that maybe doesn't have the opportunity for repair. And so you can have all the right experience and skill and certifications and all of those things, and nobody is impervious or invulnerable to making errors and mistakes. I for sure know that. I mean, look at what happened to the School of Consciousness Medicine and the consciousness medicine, community. These were people who were regarded as some of the most qualified elders in the space, and then it turned out that they were fucking their clients. So again, with psychedelics, it's not that this stuff is unique to psychedelics. This also happens in psychotherapy. This happens out there in the world. what ends up happening is that psychedelics can become this like microcosm of all of these things that happen in society. And so for my story, I realized that if I'm going to offer the service, I also need to create the paradigm and the structure upon which this thing can live as well. And I think most entrepreneurs run into that, right? They're like, not only do I have to devise the product or the service, which it's just hard to sell stuff. It's hard to promote stuff. It's hard to get the right connection to the right person who's ready to engage in that thing. That in itself is like a whole area of entrepreneurship. And then it's like, well, is the thing that I'm offering built upon the right structure to like house all of this? And I think that's where a lot of psychedelic entrepreneurs find themselves today.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's why I was also happy to be able to get you on the show, is because, this is the stuff I can see without really knowing really well, and just knowing, seeing Psychedelic Passage and the website and what you guys offer and the copy and the people I've talked to about it. It's like, oh, okay, this is the stuff that can be often missing in having a successful practice and a successful business in the space. There's a lot to learn from what you're doing. And it's you think about how complex the world is right now, specifically, and people are being replaced by AI, and who knows how much is that's going to happen over the next 7 years. And so you have all these new issues and challenges. And so, one of the things, if someone's like, oh, I want to go into this space of psychedelic, whatever, facilitation, or the business of something in the psychedelic space, you're going to run into these issues if you don't have, systems in place and structures and people to mentor. Do you ever do that? Do you ever mentor people in the space to create psychedelic businesses?
I think informally, there's definitely a lot of conversations that I have of people who kind of see what we're doing. They're like, hey, can I pick your brain? Or do you have thoughts on this? Like I have a lot of those conversations, definitely. I mean, one of my goals with the facilitator network is, how do I platform these folks? How do I like help them to create their own structure? Because I want the people who are practicing in my belief of the best way, the most highly ethical way, I want those folks to win. So can I create the mechanisms in which that's valued and they win, right? So that's like a part of it. We don't do a ton of like formal, consulting, advising, and things like that. And at the same time, I recognize that you could be an amazing human and an awesome service provider, a very innovative person, and terrible at marketing and terrible at lead gen. And so one of the things that I try to solve is, okay, can I actually help facilitators to do that? Like, can my activities and my persona online and a lot of my educational stuff, like, can that actually help this like downwind effect of the facilitators, like in our network? So there's a little bit of like my own like organic approach to that, I think. And I do hope that, the facilitators in our network have like gleaned and learned some things. And also I have a ton to learn as a part of it too.
Yeah, I think it provides another opportunity to provide that, because that's the other thing is, as I entered this space, I entered the space of entrepreneurship, not in the psychedelic space at all, and I've just come this year to get really curious about this space and how I can contribute to it in a meaningful way, and as a psychedelic concierge, and really learning what that means, and how challenging it can be to put yourself out there as that in a space that's still emerging. And I think there was just a video on YouTube like 2 weeks ago. It said like 3 grandmothers eat psilocybin and we film it, and it's like 2 million views. It's like, wow, it's moving along, but it's still, there's still a lot to navigate for not only people finding psychedelics, which I know there's many people who are going to listen to this show that still have yet to engage in psychedelics, and they're curious about it. And so, if you can be a bridge to, hey, you know what? Here's my company. We help with this. And here's a podcast. I can help with you. I can help you to gain access to knowledge for free. This is free. It's a free YouTube video. This is a free podcast. So, there's that, but there's also the facilitators out there doing incredible work who are going to exit the space because they can't make a living. So they do great work, but to sustain it over a year with a family could be challenging. So just some of the things I see too.
Yeah. And it's hard enough starting any type of venture or organization on your own, regardless of whatever sector. It's even harder when there's not structure and existing paradigms to that, as I'm speaking about with the industry. And even harder when there's a mixed set of rules and legal policies around those things. And so I think anybody who's entering into the psychedelic facilitation space, just know you're doing it on hard mode. That's just how it's going to be. If you don't want it on hard mode, wait 10 years. And some people will establish it, and it'll still be hard. It'll still be hard because you're working with humans, Yeah. And so there are some positives and negatives to that. The positive is that there are now educational programs, graduate study programs, experiential programs, certifications. Like, it was definitely a if you know type environment even 10 years ago, where you had to be plugged into the right community and the right people to even get an introduction to a teacher or a mentor. And then you got to actually go through the apprenticeship and the mentorship. And so that's a pathway. And then there's going to be other pathways where folks are, let's say, coming through traditional psychotherapy, and they're like, I can't spend, 3 months out of the year for 5 years in South America doing medicine work, right? And so I think that there's this interesting benefit of multiple pathways towards facilitation. And there is the what I'll call like the hard skills. Like, can you understand the concepts and the lessons and things? And then there's also maybe the I wouldn't say soft skills, but like the intangibles, where you can learn all those things and still be a crappy facilitator as well. And then I think that the negative of the emergence, one of them, this is a pretty dynamic analysis that I'm making here, and it's not comprehensive, but one of the negatives is that when psychedelics move to the mainstream, it actually removes a lot of the social protective mechanisms that are related to it. So what I mean is that psychedelics were regarded as counterculture for the vast majority of time in our society. And if you were part of that counterculture, that meant that you were willing to take some risks and you were willing to put yourself out there because what you were doing mattered and was important. And so I would assume that 20 years ago, if one psychedelic facilitator met another, there would be this like, oh, real recognizes real. Like, I see you because I imagine that what you're doing out there requires risk, requires dedication, requires sacrifice, and all of those things if you're going to be putting yourself out there doing that as let's just say a highly qualified, highly ethical psychedelic facilitator 20 years ago. Well, now it's different, because what the paradigm is to qualify somebody, how do you socially validate somebody in the psychedelic facilitation space? Well, it goes a little like this. I was broken and I was seeking healing. I found psychedelics and it changed my life. And now this is how I've chosen to serve. And what I mean by there's a problem inherent to that is that 20 years ago, that was a social validating metric. Now the social value to that is much lower because everyone's going to say that in the psychedelic space. So if everyone says that and has the same story, then how do you actually tell who are the people doing things in a positive and ethical way and who aren't? Because somebody who had one mushroom experience and then all of a sudden becomes a facilitator in the next month will have the same story right? And so that's an effect of this entering into the mainstream. And so we have to come up with new ways of socially validating the people and the services and the organizations that are in engaging in it. And everyone's going to have a different opinion on what those right values are. But it's actually a very interesting thing, because if I put myself in the shoes of a 88-year-old grandma who maybe did LSD once in the 60s and are now circling back to it, all of that sounds good. If I was choosing between, hopefully, 3 different facilitators and they all have that same story, and I get a good vibe from each of them, and it also sounds like each of them are, qualified, then how do I actually know how to make my choice? You see? So there's just this really interesting dynamic, going on around the emergence of psychedelic facilitation. And on one end, there's more pathways than ever. And on the other end, what I'm describing is that the same issues need to be solved.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. What it makes me think about is when I hear, sort of through my 5-MeO DMT training and staying with that medicine for years, and just seeing what I've seen, people have seizures, people, there's a lot that happens, and people are, if you're like, okay, I did a weekend journey or did some ayahuasca, now I'm going to go and serve people. It's like, there's some serious risks. And it's just to have, the understanding that, like you said, a minimum of a number of journeys and facilitation experience that you have is what I see critically important, because especially as we're getting into this psychedelic renaissance, and there's going to be more people coming to medicines, you're going to have more negative press too towards psychedelics, because more people are doing it, and there's facilitators who do not know what to do if someone has a seizure or something happens and during a journey that they hopefully will be able to be helped with 911, but we don't know. And so it's just a more, that's why the more I'm in, the longer I stay in the space, I realize how much more humility, education, and just the importance of being patient and really doing the due diligence before you would think about hiring a facilitator. And also, if you were going to facilitate, what that would entail and take. So it's just I just think it's becoming more and more important. Like you said, what if my mom wanted to do psychedelics, right? She's probably never going to do it. But if she did, I'm not just going to send her to some person I just met. It's going to be someone who I can trust and vet and know her, the contraindications she may have, and her history and their trauma history, all of it. It's going to be really important. So it's a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, and then I think also in the honor of the humility and the student mentality that you're speaking about, I think one of the best things that a facilitator in the space can do is hold the willingness to be wrong, the willingness to be incorrect about things. And hopefully the things that you're wrong about, the things that you're incorrect about, are not at the cost of clients and the people you serve. And sometimes it is as well. And so I think holding that psyche, or that within your psyche, that willingness to be wrong, can go, I think, a very long way. There's a lot of hubris that can be built into any emergent field when just life in general, probably, but especially with psychedelics. And when something is new and it's moving really fast and things are evolving really fast, well, there can be a lot of space to do funny stuff, to do sideways things, as I regard. And what I mean by that are maybe ethically questionable things, or policies and practices that don't create any repercussions now, but 10 years down the road they might. And so there is this constant evolving. That's my message also for people wanting to get into the space, is that your intake form that worked 2 years ago likely is probably out of date now. Your protocol and disclosure and what you share with people Do you have a physical touch, thing written out, your emergency medical thing like written out? And I think that some of the best folks who I respect in the space are continually tweaking and evolving and updating those things. Like we're getting new information every day. And then it's like, how do you like keep up with that?
Yeah, it's a living, breathing document.
Mhm.
These intake forms that we create, and absolutely, they just keep evolving because life is evolving, people are evolving, the space is evolving, education is evolving, and we're all learning. And I always want to stay. I get emails from these different psychedelic companies and newsletters, but I'm just always trying to educate myself on the space and what's happening, what's emerging. And that's not everyone's going to do that, but that's my responsibility, I feel, as someone in the space who has a platform to talk about it. And I make mistakes too, and but I want to learn, and I want to bring people on that can have these discussions. And yeah, I really appreciate our discussion today. I know that your platform has you have 300 blogs, and you have a podcast, and so you have incredible resources for people. So why don't you let people know how they can work with you and how they
Yeah.
can find you?
Yeah, thank you. So we have a couple of channels that are important. Our website, psychedelicpassage.com. In there houses our blog, of which we have probably written about 300 articles, plus. We have the podcast, the Psychedelic Passage podcast, which primarily goes through on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We also have a YouTube channel at Psychedelic Passage where we're putting up, videos and, things like that. The best and most exciting thing that we have nowadays is our online care community through the Circle platform. And so we have a free version of that where people can join, and then also a subscriber community where people are dropping into e-courses, online courses, discussion boards, topics, and then also live events that are hosted and ran by facilitators in our network, as well as myself. So those are the major channels and how people can connect with us.
Yeah, and that kitty really wants to get in and see the corner. No, that's great. But I appreciate you sharing that, and definitely we'll link all this to the show notes. And I'm just excited to continue to have these conversations with you and see how we can collaborate in this idea of obviously ethics and standards, but also psychedelic concierge and connecting people with facilitators that can provide these services and do them with great care, because I come from that space too, of mental health and addiction, and coming from the lens of a lot of psychological lens. Even though I love the ineffable and meeting God, that's cool too, but there is a heavy focus on that as well in sort of the life path that I've walked. And so a lot of people need great care. A lot of people reach out to me are in a challenging situation. So if they're asking about psychedelics, I want to make sure that I'm putting them in the right place, giving them the right guidance. So I feel really great about what you're doing, and I'm so excited that I think you have something too to offer the listeners. Did you have some type of 30-day offer?
Yeah, so for our online care community, we typically do a 2-week trial. Okay. But we have a free month for folks like listeners here who are wanting to, tap into that community, check it out for a month for free. And that link, I think I've given you as well.
Okay, great. We'll share that in the show notes. And you could see how the sun has changed. 4 times during this. We had an earthquake. Yeah. It's a big deal. So, wow. So thanks again, Jimmy, for coming on the show. Really grateful for your wisdom, your grace, your calmness. And thanks so much, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a great honor.
Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs of Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.